Hello, and welcome to Message in the Middle with Marianne. We all know that life is hard, right? It's messy, it's unpredictable, but it can be wonderful all at the same time. My hope is that we can take a deep dive into self-development topics and explore life's lessons through book clubs, conversations, and interviews. And together, we can uncover the lessons that others have already learned to help us navigate this crazy, wonderful ride called life. Hello and welcome to Message in the Middle with Marianne. Today I have Bryony Smith with me. Bryony is a second-generation psychotherapist and psychosynthesis life coach. She has a private practice near Amherst, Mass, and also does virtual coaching sessions for people all over the world. Hello and welcome to the show. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me.
Hi, great to be here. Nice to see you.
So before we dig in and I start asking you some questions, first, I'll tell my guests that we already did this first part once and we're recording a second time because we had technical difficulties, and that happens, you guys. But we're taking two so we can get it all in for you guys. And typically, I ask my guests to give a little bit of their background so people understand their upbringing and their journey, and that sort of helps us understand who they are and their message. So can you give me that story again?
Sure. As I was saying, when we had that little technological blip, I said, we're just rolling with reality here. So whatever happens, we just learn to be with it. So yeah, I had been saying I had an unusual upbringing. Both my parents were transpersonal psychotherapists, so they were interested in Jungian dream work. My mom led a women's group for much of my childhood. So I feel fortunate that they were encouraging of both my brother and I to express our emotions and not talk about things. So that was helpful and unusual. But they also encouraged us to follow our intuition, develop our intuition, kind of trust our gut. So I have to say that that's the main thing that I feel like helped me in my meandering journey. You know, as I said, I always knew I would probably be a therapist, but it took me, lots of twists and turns. And I didn't get my master's in mental health counseling until I was 50. So yeah, I've always trusted my gut. I honestly can say I don't regret any of the decisions. I've worked for a lot of nonprofits. Finding a sense of meaning and purpose and like-minded community has been my focus my whole life. So that's the main space that I'm coming from.
I think that the journey and the meandering is definitely what helps us when we get to this spot, right? It's all those experiences that we've been through that really gives us the context to then become, I guess, we were supposed to become, right, is what I'm kind of learning. So in the intro, I did a short part of your bio, but the rest of your bio notes that you specialize in sharing practical tools to help clients create new habits and an increased sense of well-being by focusing on self-compassion practices, dream work, guided imagery, and finding ways to bring mindfulness into their daily life. So I want to explore those because they're all topics we work with. They're all super important. And I want to start by hitting on the self-compassion practices. I think that some of the work we're doing, and we're reading Dr. Amy Johnson's Just a Thought in my private Facebook community. And I think that that book and the concepts in it tie into self-compassion because I feel like we're often our worst enemies, our own worst enemies, and we are self-critics to the highest degree a lot of the times. And learning to understand that a thought is just a thought and that we can decide to act on that thought or not act on that thought is really powerful. Can you share with me a little bit about what you do in that space and how you feel like that idea, that concept might feed into having a better self-compassion practice?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I had shared some, part of why I love doing what I do is I feel like, I have to walk my talk. I have to do these practices myself because I feel like it radiates when we're living it. You have to create daily small habits. So, for me, sometimes people will hear self-compassion practice and think, oh, it's this really kind of fluffy, not something that is really practical, or they might not connect with it.
Woo woo. People think it's woo woo.
They think it's woo woo. It's true. There's actually this great article, Dr. Kristen Neff, who has a wonderful TED Talk on her research on self-compassion practice. She has this article about the 5 myths of self-compassion practice that are just, I share it with a lot of clients just so they see the research behind self-compassion practice. And I like how you introduced it with thoughts, because it requires being mindful in the moment of sort of what is this negative sentiment override that all of our brains do, because it was sort of like when we're out in the desert, we have to look for danger. And so we have this tendency to look for what's wrong. And we do that with ourselves. It's a strong habit. And so it takes intentionality to just slowly undo that habit. And so you and I had talked about thought stopping. And so part of it is this sense in self-compassion of, how would you treat your beloved pet, or if you have children, or you're around a niece or nephew, you wouldn't talk to them the way that you talk to yourself. So it's sort of recognizing that you want to sort of befriend yourself. And that's where actually change happens. It doesn't come from self-hatred. Positive, lasting change does not come from self-flagellation. And so if I'm standing at the sink washing dishes or brushing my teeth, this is where all of us kind of go into the default mode, where we're just kind of spacing out. So if I ask myself, is this thought useful? That's a mindfulness exercise where I'm like, okay, where are my thoughts right now? And honestly, 99% of the time, it's some sort of like, oh, I can't believe that person said that to me. That hurt my feelings, something in the past, or, oh, I'm really worried about, tomorrow or this thing coming up. Worry thoughts about the future. We're rarely just here in this present moment. So when we stop and learn to master our thoughts, you can have a sense of self-compassion, which is honestly befriending yourself. And I will say to myself, oh, sweetie, it's understandable that you're nervous about this important meeting coming up this week. You're going to be fine. I'm here with you. Whatever you would say to a beloved friend, you start to change that self-talk, and you notice the more compassionate you are with yourself. Truly, you are that more that way with people you come in contact with.
I love 2 things that you said around, is this thought useful to me right now? I think that is fantastic. So simple, obviously so hard, but so simple. Mm-hmm. And you made me think of, and I think I might have mentioned that we just read Mel Robbins' High Five Habit, and similar to that self-talk of looking in the mirror and saying, it's similar to what you just said, like have a more compassionate dialogue with yourself.
Yeah.
Similar to what you would have with someone you love. And I don't think that comes natural, or if it did, we lost it along the way. I'm not sure I know the answer to that yet, but I do think that too feels a little woo-woo at first to people, right? When we read it and we started doing it in the group and we did the challenge, right? People were posting the pictures, but we all agreed that it feels weird at first. It feels weird to look in the mirror and high five yourself and say all these positive things. But it also does change your perspective in the day and in the moment, of course, but also for the day. I think it follows you is what we kind of came out of it knowing. So do you find that people are a little leery at first when you tell them to have those conversations? Because I know you don't have to say it out loud. You could say it in your head, but if you're having that conversation with yourself, it could come across a little weird. It's not the norm, right?
Right.
So are people typically leery, but then tell you later that they've found it very positive in their experience?
Absolutely. Yeah. Most people are just like, yeah, whatever. And honestly, it can take several months or a year before somebody really starts to say, okay, what I'm doing isn't working. it's through suffering that we start to say, okay, why don't I just try this thing? There's also research on it. So let me just try it, even if it feels awkward or unnatural. I had a client I had been working with for 3 years, and it wasn't until the second year, because understandably she was saying, but you don't understand, I'm such a mess. So she was like justifying, all my negative self-talk is totally valid, you don't get it, you don't get it. I'm like, okay, keep arguing, for this painful existence that isn't working for you. But it was like 2.5 years, she's like, I get it, like I'm starting to do it and it's making a difference.
What do you think changed that? Because I'm so interested, well, in many of the topics that we discuss, I'm really interested in what the flip of the switch is, if you will, or where people finally get that the light bulb goes off. Like, what do you think that is? Like, what's the spot where somebody finally understands something maybe they heard 5,000 times in the past even, but this time it made sense and it clicked.
Yeah, it clicked. You know what it was?
What?
It was her listening to how her daughter. So when you see yourself mirrored in another person, and you're talking to, in this case, it can be a child or a friend or a relative, and you see how they're like, oh, I'm so horrible, and why can't I get my stuff together, and I always do this, I never do this, and then you say, no, you're really great. So it really clicked. It was like, wow, now I see I do the same thing to myself. And honestly, there is intergenerational trauma. Her daughter inherited this family pattern of negative self-talk, honestly, self-hatred. And so it was getting to a point of exhaustion. This isn't working. I'm in a state of racing thoughts. And so, all right, maybe I'll try this thing.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
I love that, the awareness coming from seeing how somebody else is doing it, because I do think that, that clicked for me, but I think people could probably take that as a tool too, just to pay more attention. If they can't yet tune into themselves, pay more attention to how they see other people interacting, and they might spot some of themselves in that behavior and then be able to become more aware.
Yeah.
That's a really good tip. Before I move on from this topic, so you had shared something with me, and I don't want to paraphrase it because I'll get it wrong, but it was a technique you use around, it has to do with a balloon. Can you share that story? Because
yes,
I loved that. And I think people can really relate to it and then take it with them. I think it's so easy to use on an ongoing basis. Can you share that?
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's actually my favorite. I do have a resource list on my website of different books and articles and TED Talks, but this is a favorite that even my 79-year-old clients like, oh my God, I've been doing it. And I told all my family about it. So it's very simple. Again, it's helpful to do when you're doing the dishes or you're sort of in a mindless state. You just pause and you say, is this thought useful? And so you're mindful of where your thoughts are. Again, 99% of the time, the answer is no. And so you just like you were saying with the book you're reading, thoughts come and go. I imagine I have a little pin in my right hand and I see this red balloon because it's kind of a playful image. And I just pop that thought balloon. This isn't useful. And I literally see the air go.
I love that.
And so it's also a playfulness. It's not like, oh, I shouldn't be thinking these thoughts, but it's just, this thought isn't useful. Let me let it go. And for me, I have to redirect my attention then to, where do I want my mind right now? If I were to master my mind and to kind of be intentional, I'm wanting to be in the present moment and sort of tune in. I feel my feet on the floor. I'm taking a deeper breath now. I'm more present and embodied in this moment. And so I can be more open, again, sort of intentional. I come more from a place of abundance and openness rather than a sense of fear and scarcity. Because the other thing that happens when we notice where our thoughts are is you'll notice that we often are shallow breathing. And when we're shallow breathing, we're really kind of stuck in our heads and often in a a state of like anxiety or fear mode. So like then when you notice the thought and you let it go and you take some full deep breath, you literally can feel you're calming your nervous system.
I really love that because I never realized the shallow breathing when you're having those type of thoughts. I'm going to pay attention to that. That's not something anybody's ever pointed out. But I can relate to how you're trying to sort of ground yourself in the moment and take those deep breaths. And it nicely leads me into some of the other work that you do. And I know that many of us are aware and understand meditation and how it can make you more self-aware. It can make you more present. It can sort of calm you, get rid of anxiousness, all those things. I think, meditation is talked about quite a lot. So I think there's a lot of information out there. Mm-hmm. But you also work with guided imagery and dream work. And I suspect guided imagery, that balloon trick is a little bit of that. I'm guessing we have not talked about this, but I'm super interested in what you do in that space and what those things look like, because I haven't really explored any of that before.
Yeah, it's interesting. This is becoming more, I have a client with some serious medical issues, and even her primary care physician is helping her use guided imagery to help with her chronic pain.
Wow.
And so it really is becoming more of a
mainstream.
And it's funny because I remember my parents, learning it in the 70s. But just as all of our thoughts produce emotions, and then that produces behaviors. So when we start with thoughts, if I'm guiding intentionally and saying, okay, if you're going to an important interview and you visualize yourself, just take 2 minutes and you close your eyes and you visualize how the interview is going, not the worry thoughts, but you visualize as best as you can. Some people aren't very visual, but just you kind of get an image of the sense of like how you want to feel after whatever you're visualizing. It actually increases those positive hormones in the body. So there are physiological changes. So it affects your emotional state. And so I use it in different ways. If a client is struggling with having a difficult conversation with a family member, I might just do a quick 4-minute guided meditation of just first dropping into a grounding mindfulness breathing, noticing the body. And then, just noticing now you're approaching this family member. Notice how you're feeling in your body. Breathe into your heart. Stay open. And just see what your imagination or your psyche, your unconscious, kind of brings to you of what you feel that you would like to communicate in the most loving way with this person. And then I'll say, just do that for a minute and nod your head if you're getting some. And everybody, it doesn't matter who they are, will say, yes, I'm seeing something. And now just see if you can sense what the other person might want to say. And just those little exercises seem to help shift because, again, the negative sentiment override is we sometimes assume the worst or we don't have confidence in ourselves. But when you have that experience, it is an actual experience in your psyche so that you can open up a greater perspective. You have more choices.
I once read, maybe more than once, and I actually can't think of where I read it right now, that the brain doesn't know the difference between something we imagine happens and something that really did happen. I might be misquoting that a little bit, but I feel like it might tie into what you're talking about because you're having them go through an exercise of really shifting their perspective to try to think about a different outcome and how that might play out, and it creating those different responses in the body. Does that fit into that thought process of your brain doesn't really know whether that's really happening or not, but you just sort of tricked it into thinking this more positive thing happened?
Absolutely. There are so many ways to use it, but I just want to say quickly 2 other ways is like, so my mother passed away in 2019. It was a really painful loss. She was like a mentor and best friend to me. And so about a year after she died, navigating my own grief, I ended up remembering, some of what I've learned and did sort of this with myself. And I do it with clients dealing with grief is I wrote a letter to myself from my mom. And again, it's our imagination, but it really is our psyche and just automatic writing on the paper. And there's this sense of connecting with her, that realizing the love is still there. Like, even though I can't see her, the love and the connection is still there. So that experience was really helpful, and it is for clients going through a grief process. And the other thing, honestly, is sort of reconciling with our younger self. A lot of us, like, I was bullied in school. I was chubby and made fun of and had scars from that. Another exercise I'll lead clients is to go back to that 9-year-old, and I lead them down a trail, and they sort of meet their whatever 7-year-old, 9-year-old self. And you just whisper into her ear, what would she have needed to hear? And it's a very powerful healing. And I think in the brain, when they look at these kind of healing exercises, there's some kind of synthesis or integration that can happen when we do these healing exercises.
I love that thought. I've done something similar with picturing yourself. It was more around trying to find sort of your passion again and what you want to do, and go back to that 7-year-old, like you said, 9-year-old, 7-year-old. I think it probably doesn't matter. And sort of picture that child and some of the things she loved and wanted to do when she grew up. And we forget along the way, right?
Yeah.
And that's something these folks are going to be sick of hearing me say it because I'm so interested. I bring it up at every podcast, but I'm so fascinated by the fact that people in our age group-ish suddenly start, I don't know, waking up is the only word I can really come up with that fits for me. And it's not just about, because not everybody is wanting to, ditch their day job and find a side hustle, whatever. But it is about, no matter where you are, what you do, feel like there is this awakening and that people start looking at things differently.
Yeah.
And it sort of baffles me that happens at this age, just sort of automatically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Don't you think the pandemic has increased that with people that you're speaking with?
Yeah.
That there's this sense of, oh, yeah, we knew that life was short and precious, but wow,
there's more.
There's a wake up call.
Yeah, I do. And one of the things, I've talked to a couple of coaches about this while I was interviewing them. I think what I find, I found it with myself, and I see it with talking with them, that in almost all cases, it's something that happens. There's some pivotal moment in life. Sure, when the kids grow up and leave and you become an empty nester, if you were, say, a stay-at-home mom, maybe that's the pivotal moment. Maybe you lost your job. Maybe somebody died. There's all these things, but it does seem that there's something that sort of puts us over the edge, if you will.
Yeah.
And it makes us start looking. And I wish I could figure out the secret to what that switch is when that thing happens, because wouldn't it have been grand if we could have done this back when we were 30?
Right.
Versus, right? But it doesn't work that way, obviously. So I don't know, but I think it's fantastic that that people are becoming more self-aware. I do think the exercise, to get back to what you were talking about, the exercise of kind of imagining your younger self, and whether it be to remember what you loved or to sort of give that person that she or he was the information or the reinforcement of what they needed to hear, that really can be powerful.
Yeah.
I think the only thing that came into my mind when you were saying it is, again, I feel like a lot of people might hear that and go, that's woo-woo-y, right? Again, I hate to keep using that word, but I don't have another one.
Absolutely. No, it's true.
So what do you tell them? Do you just say, hey, you hired me to work with you, just try it? Like I'm imagining that conversation, but you have to kind of get them to go for it, right? To get into it.
Yeah, honestly, at first I would sort of be hesitant because I would work with somebody and think, oh, they're going to think this is really woo-woo. But I have to tell you that I have so much confidence in it now, because it doesn't matter if it's a 70-year-old lawyer, super rational, practical, non-woo-woo, again, 80-year-old, a 22-year-old. It doesn't matter the background, the age, what their beliefs are. If they're struggling with something, and it doesn't matter what it is, if my intuition at the moment is like, they're struggling with a sense of not knowing where to go next. That's such a common thing for all of us. Should I do this or should I do that? Small or big, doesn't matter. I'll say, are you willing to just do a little 5-minute exercise with me? And they all say yes. And I cannot tell you, every single one of them is like, wow, that was really helpful. For one, it was kind of imagining that they melted into a particular family member. They sort of were, kind of merging with that person to embody them and to see the world through their eyes. And this client, who's not into any woo-woo stuff at all, has referred to that multiple times, saying that session when you did that was so helpful. I had so much empathy for her. I hadn't really thought of how it is for her. So it's used for all sorts of different things. It can be a short little exercise, again, using the imagination, but it's our psyche. There's an inner, deeper wisdom that all of us have. And we know this. You know this when you've had moments in your life where you say, I can't explain it, but I have this really strong feeling like I shouldn't do this, or I shouldn't go in there, or I shouldn't be with this person. We have this inner wisdom. So it really is tapping into that.
Yeah.
And really, it really has been helpful for everyone I've worked with.
And in that case, the example you just gave where the woman did that, it was more of her tapping into and imagining the other person that she's maybe, I'll say conflict, having a conflict with. Maybe it wasn't conflict, but that area she needed to kind of get over and figure out how to navigate. So that's interesting. And then being able to do it with your own self as well and envision what your own self is. So I get your point. You can use it in so many ways to sort of explore and get yourself into a different perspective.
Yeah, exactly.
That's fantastic. Thinking about some habit changing, many of the people in my group are on, I'll just say lots of different journeys, but everybody's looking to create new goals or have new goals in the lifestyles they're trying to create, which of course requires some habit changes, right? Getting rid of some old ones, getting rid of some new ones. Again, I know that's some of your focus work. Can you share anything that jumps out at you that's been super helpful, impactful for across the board or a lot in that area of creating new habits?
Sure. I think the two that come to mind first are screen addictions and sugar. So again, I don't inflict this on anyone unless they're interested, but it's such a common thing. I just think most of us are addicted to things like that. And there's a love-hate relationship, clients. I remember a few months ago, I was working with a young college student she used the term doom scrolling. And I was like, that's such a great term. I thought she came up with it. I didn't know that it was a thing. But, it's like, oh, why do I do this? I stay up, late, and I'm like looking at Instagram and I'm looking at Facebook, and it always makes me feel crappy. And yet I can't stop doing it. So again, one of the resources I'll offer, like other people's, research or podcasts, is Nathaniel Salas. There's this interesting interview he did called The Dopamine Detox, and it's looking at screen addiction and what they're finding that we all know about the dopamine hit that we get. We open our phone, we're checking our email like a gazillion times a day, which is, when you think about what you're doing, it's like, why am I doing this? But it's totally, it's an addiction. And so it really does, again, require some mindfulness and intentionality to say, when you go on vacation and you're by the water and you feel so much more rested and you're not staring at your phone all day, I just propose that we consider that it's not just being in nature and being on vacation. It's that we're not staring at a phone all day, which I don't think nature intended for our brains. It keeps us in this loop of needing these kind of artificial dopamine hits. And so you replace it with the things that that are better. It's like, even if I only have a few minutes, I'm just going to go outside and I'm going to look at the birds and I'm going to look at the trees and look at the green of the trees and kind of saturate my brain with fresh air and looking at nature for a few minutes rather than scrolling on my phone. Because the other thing that when I've done this with myself is I say, how do I feel? Be really honest. When I open up Instagram, Facebook, my email for the 20th time, or OkCupid app, whatever it is, how do I feel in my body right now? And if you're really refined with your mindful attention, you'll notice there's a sense of agitation and anxiety. And so, okay, I'm wanting connection. I'm feeling lonely. What's a different way that I can get that? Because I'm not getting it from my phone. And so I'm going to call a girlfriend, or I'm going to take a walk or go to a cafe and kind of be around other humans. So you replace it with some other ways to get that. You kind of sense in, what does my system need right now? I'll do a 2-minute laughter yoga YouTube video, which I realize is screens, but it's like sometimes you need to cheer yourself up by just doing some laughter rather than scrolling, you know?
So it's back to being very mindful and asking yourselves the right questions, because it's noticing the behavior. It's stopping for a moment, taking a pause and asking yourself some good questions. Like, why am I doing this? What am I looking for? How do I feel?
Yeah.
That's what I just get out of what you said. And then based on those answers, finding something that can replace it and still get us towards that same thing that we're looking for.
Yeah. And I think when you read that book about habits, they have to be little small changes. Yeah. So I can't say to myself, oh, I'm not going to look at my phone, or I'm going to quit sugar tomorrow forever. We can't do these big changes that aren't going to last. And so you just do a little new things each day. Like, how am I going to feel after I do this versus this? How am I going to feel later today? How does this affect me? Or why am I doing this thing? What is it serving? And so when we really peel down the layers, it's like, oh, I'm needing some energy right now. So I think jumping in place for 2 minutes would be better for me than eating sugar, because I know that I feel crappy afterwards,
Yeah, that's interesting. It's so
hard.
Yeah, it is so hard. I mean, isn't all the good stuff a little bit hard? Like digging into any of this mind work, I think it's really hard, but it gets us to a different place, right? It gets us to such a more insightful and profound. Again, now I'm sounding a little woo-woo, but it gets you to that place where I just feel like you can be so much more present in your life and learn how to spend your time in a way that really makes you happy versus just wasting it away. It's so short.
Yeah.
But I do think you have to do the work. So interesting. This has been super fun and super insightful. So thank you so much for joining me. I will put all your references and the links to your information. Your primary website is heartmindhealing.net, I believe. Is that right?
That's right. Thank you.
And before we say goodbye, is there any other parting words or any, special tips that you want to leave on the audience? No pressure if you don't and you think we covered the bulk of it. That's all good too.
I think the only thing I would say is, with all these changes, again, it's great we talked about self-compassion and making small changes, is to be kind and patient with oneself. So any of these practices, even thought stopping, when we do anything at first, there's a sense of frustration, like, oh my God, look at how often I have worry thoughts. I don't like doing the self-compassion practice because it makes me realize how much I'm worrying, and that's uncomfortable. And so to bring a sense of patience and just saying, my intention for today is to be the best version of myself that I can, and I don't want to sleepwalk through my life. And so what would that look like today? One little thing. I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to have some positive thoughts about something that's about to happen. Just one little thing, and that's enough. That's good enough.
I love that. I think that would be a really positive mantra to start your day every day. Just asking yourself that question and bring that into daily practices. Like, what's one thing that can bring me closer to that version of myself that I want to be? and then trying to act on that. And I also think your point about being patient. Yeah, I'm glad you brought it up because this is hard work, like we were talking about. And it takes a lot of trial and error, and it takes a lot of consistency from what I'm seeing in my own life and from talking to other people. And it's not a straight path. Like we jokingly said, life was, a meandering path. Well, similarly, this work is too. You feel like you get it 1 minute, and the next minute you're back to having some of those, negative or not helpful thoughts. And I feel like it's something that you probably have to do the work on forever.
Yeah, absolutely. We're not trying to be perfect.
Yeah. It's progress, not perfection. Yeah.
Yeah.
And not bringing any shame into that, right? Not what I heard you say is don't bring the shame in. You didn't use that word, but it was about not judging that it didn't come quickly or that we fell back into our old practice. That's kind of normal, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So just work on continuing the cycle, continuing on up-leveling and doing the work.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Beautifully said.
Thank you so much. This has been really great.
Thank you. That was fun.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Message in the Middle with Marianne. If you enjoyed the podcast, please take a minute to share it and write a review as it helps bring new listeners to our audience. If you'd like to keep the conversation going between episodes, please join us at Facebook group Message in the Middle with Marianne.